Okay, hello folks. Can you guys hear me? Yes, great. Okay. Welcome to our second Prout of the semester. I am the instructor for Prout this year. So if you have not had a chance to sign up in the back, please do so. And if you haven't had a chance to check my name is Hannah Yarrington. And if you haven't gotten a chance to check the Canvas page for this course, if you are a BFA student, please make sure that you do so. There you'll find all relevant information about office hours, a little bit about me, a picture of my dog, and expectations for this course. So that you're aware, the expectations for this course have changed a little bit since last semester. If you're a creative writing major, you're expected to attend 8 Prout readings this semester, and that breaks down into you need to attend 2 MFA readings, so this counts as one of them, 2 visiting writers, and 3 BFA readings, so all of the BFA readings at the end. If you are a minor, you're expected to attend 6 rather than 5 last semester, and so that breaks down to 2 MFA readings, 2 visiting writers, and 2 of the BFAs. We're going to be recording these readings now, some, not all, though. If you need to miss a reading due to illness, some will be recorded, and you need to let me know beforehand that you're going to miss it, and a 1-page reflection will be due afterwards on the readings, so that I know that you watched it. There'll be more information up on Canvas about that. If you miss one and it's not recorded, and you need the credit for that one, there's a BFA portfolio, like makeup portfolio, also on my Canvas page that has lots of links to other readings, and you can choose one of those. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. And all of this is on Canvas, so you can review this at any point. But without any further ado, I'm going to have our readers come up. So I hope you guys have a great Prout.
That's hilarious. Hello. Okay, that sounds like people can hear me. My name is Kevin. I'm a poet, and I'm here to introduce another poet named Michael Beard. I met Michael this summer. The program was welcoming in the next crop of students, and I was immediately struck by the quiet intensity with which he takes in his surroundings and the people within them. When you speak, he actually looks at you, actually mulls over what you're saying. And in turn, when he speaks, it makes you listen back. And I know that sounds trivial, but as we pretend that we're nothing more than just relay towers for cell phone signals as opposed to human beings in a physical universe, or we just wait for our turn to talk about the last thing we read on the internet, the person who actually listens to you seems to be exceedingly rare. And it is with that depth of observation, of contemplation, that Michael works with poetry. Whether it is the juice of a lemon dripping down a forearm, the curve of a neck longing for family, for home, seeing your first dead body, or rotisserie chickens. Michael understands and always, in every aspect of his writing, works with the most critical and vital aspect of any artistic endeavor, and that is resonance. It's connection. Many of you will leave tonight wondering why certain details, images from the poems you'll hear stay with you, why they followed you into the weekend. And it is because you will intuitively understand the significance of them to the speaker and the stakes therefore, and they will become significant to you. If you enjoy what you hear tonight, I can tell you where you can find more of Michael's work. Please find him over at the Mantle Poetry, Oakland Arts Review, Glass Mountain Review, and the 2021 Southern Literary Festival Anthology, among other places. So please, please, help me in welcoming my fellow tall human and spinner of verse, Michael Beard.
Wow. Wasn't expecting all of that, to be honest. That was quite something. Lately, I've been thinking about community, and that introduction only serves as a stepping stone or a pillar of community that I admire here at BGSU. And community is something I've often overlooked, but I'm glad I found a community and a home here among my fellow writers. So I appreciate you and I love you. So I have a group of poems here for you. Yeah, I couldn't have described my own poetry better than Kevin did right there. So I'm gonna let his introduction speak for these poems, and hopefully these poems speak for themselves as well. First poem is titled Blue Poem. I wait in a blue hour. A dusk blue light wraps the orchard like a blanket. Rows of blueberries hang like the sapphires in my grandmother's earrings, my calloused hands still indigo from last harvest. She was buried on a blue morning with those earrings, sapphire in life, nowhere in death but the blue shadow of a casket. I wait here, the birds sleeping, blue jeans tumbling in the dryer, and I wonder if those earrings were made with real sapphires. This next poem is called Self-Portrait is Juicing, and it is a part of a series that I have fallen into of describing everyday objects or images that I find captivating as if it were myself or a portrait of myself. So this is Self-Portrait is Juicing. I have a couple more of these later on, so this is the first one. Self-Portrait is Juicing. I try to follow the squeeze of a lemon, shapeless, a dripping image of something close to delight. Sour is an idea that depends on whether the body knows itself. The tongue, the heart, the spill down to the bottom wrist. The act of a tightened fist is a pronunciation of self, a motion toward discovery. This next poem is a sequence of much smaller poems, and so it's called terrestrial sequence. So I will take longer pauses in between the certain sections so you know how I divided them up. So this is terrestrial sequence. Dead ladybugs dot the windowsill of my corner office. The sunlight shapes a mass of caskets out of their tiny shadows. How depressing, how freeing. Caught in the scope of my rifle, a deer turns her head, the flash of an old scar where a bullet grazed her neck, an unwritten word of her survival, of her unconquered history. No dinner tonight. I am no hunter. It is so quiet in the moonlight where the dark sky loses itself. A red oak leaf floats calmly down the river, and I ask it to teach me how to ease my sunken stars. The sky's edge is so much like a pocket. It swallows everything in the wash. I want to play dead like a dog working for a treat, or a cat who just wants to sleep in someone else's bed. This next one is titled Bending into a New Fashion. Suppose a half-eaten pear decomposes on a station bench, buried in a wad of napkins, left to its eventual undoing. 20 minutes, another bus passes, it goes on. Somewhere in a cobwebbed corner of the mind, you wish to deny this process, how decay has always been easy. The way Hamlet raises a familiar skull to his own, searching for an afterlife in those hollow eyes. You look out of the bus window and see stray dogs running in the tall grass, a pack of them. They are not lost in these plains of Costa Rica, not like you, fiddling with the mahjong tile in your pocket, the orchid piece you found at the park. Perhaps the tile called to you, noticing the way you walked, noticing the way you walked, the watch on your arm, like a pendulum, maintaining the times of its swings. You were nearly late for the bus this morning. The church on the way to the station had you thinking about heaven, sitting on that bench, a whole pair, feeling yourself beginning to deny this procession. And you heard the driver calling to board. This is another self-portrait poem. It is titled Self-Portrait as Melting. Sometimes I melt in my own hands, like snow when the sun rises and warmth soaks through the curtains. I like to think there's a new sun every day. I keep less and less of myself this way, my body melting in my palms, loose skin dripping on the tile. The fridge buzzes as if there's something left worth saving. I think I'm a good person most days. The amount of good things I would choose to keep for myself is about a puddle's worth. I don't know how much that is exactly. And what about what a body unmade does to the heart? The volume of unmaking, the size of absence. Only cupped hands could measure that. This next poem is titled Bones We Learned to Live Without. We migrate to the forest, searching for what it means to be scavenged. There is no forest. I'm standing alone in my kitchen, picking clean the leftover rotisserie, tossing bones to the corner of my paper plate, meat gone cold. I breathe alongside the silence, like a vulture who circles too many times before landing. I am no vulture, according to my mother, who lives tired and alone. She aches of sciatica, She aches of reassurance, telling me I must go and forage a life with my own hands. My father, lying in a strange bed, infection eating away his hip, he prays for what is left of him to return from the nursing home. Home is a place I don't know anymore. Hundreds of miles from Tennessee, away from the comfortable hills, the board games we played after dinner, I am all of one now. Every wall between us echoes a sun-sized hollowness, split from the bone, a spent family kept barely alive by a phone call every other weekend. Third funeral. In one day, a tree can lose all its leaves, like the night my mother cried to me about another death in the family. Inextinguishable winds blow onwards outside the funeral home where I saw my first dead body, someone who once knew me. The satin-lined afternoon smothers dry earth. Wind-fallen leaves sink faithfully toward unsettled dust. No wonder we insist on better places. All right, I got a love poem now, so we'll escape the sadness for a second here. I'm gonna get a drink of water. This one is titled, The Roots You Swear By. You bring me inside the greenhouse where you spend hours cultivating yourself. You measure that my heart takes one cactus to fill, and I insist it's more like two if we don't count the roots. And you say, always count the roots. An orchid brushes against my wrist, and I flinch. Stump shoulders, dry fingers not conditioned for such intimacy, such lavish intimacy. I watch you mist the ferns the way our soft breaths manifest in the cold, attentive, tender, these methods an unspoken cycle of keeping. Please don't ask me to take the cactus home, because then I will grow to witness what these two hands can nourish. Press thumbs into spines, prove that cactus and heart are not so different when it comes to where we put our love. This next poem is titled Prediction. Tonight, when I took in the rain and dressed it in dry clothes, you poured yourself away from me. A kettle whispering, a jar of tea dropped open on the floor. You forgot to take the silence with you to the car. I piled it up in the corner of the living room, the brewing walls staring, knotted wood like soft eyes. Maybe you let the weather predict all the places you could go. The leaves of our end floating in the swirling water, spilling gracefully into the drain. I'm going to preface this next poem. It is essentially a longer poem about two strangers talking at a diner. So there's dialogue and also narration. So yeah, this is called A Conversation with a Stranger at a Diner Near Close. And then she rang that bell, the end of treatment bell at the front desk. And she had the biggest smile on her face. You would have thought she won the lottery. And I suppose she did, as much of a damn lottery beating cancer could have been, The waitress pours us another cup of black coffee, plops 2 creams between our plates of toast crumbs and jelly skid marks. I can only imagine how much those celebratory bells can mean to someone, how much can really be wrapped in that small ringing. It was a few years until she had bad pain again, abdomen. I'm thinking, oh shit, it came back. Oh shit, it came back. You ever get feelings wrong so much, you know the few times you get them right? I did know, though I didn't respond. Well, fucking sucks, doesn't it? We both chuckle and take sips of our one cream coffees, enjoying the short silence. I look around and it's just us, the waitress out back for a smoke, the jukebox long quiet. The man clears his throat, breathes slower, drops his shoulders. At the hospital, they put her in a private room. I was in the lobby. I remember staring at a painting of a cardinal, bright red, sitting on a branch surrounded by snow. That was all I could look at. The waitress walks back in and takes our plates to the kitchen. Then the doctor calls me in from the hall, tells me that the cancer's back, that it's bad, and it was bad. She didn't last 2 weeks. That was 3 weeks ago. I take a sip and realize I've already finished my coffee. The waitress brings us both our checks. The man ignores it and stares at the spot on the counter where his plate had been, his leg bouncing at the foot of the stool. But she rang the bell. But she rang the fucking bell. I take my check, pull out a 20 for the waitress. I walk out into the parking lot, a little less alone now. I look at the front window and see the man still sitting in the same stool, staring at the same spot, a cardinal in snow, stuck under the bright wash of the fluorescence, the whole world silent except for a neon buzz, impossible to filter out. One last smoke with you before I move across the country. It is so quiet in the moonlight where the sky loses itself, lying at the foot of Berry Hill, city lights dozing off in the distance. You pull out a blue lighter and place it in my palm with a pair of cigarettes, still warm from the roots of your pocket. I flick the wheel and raise an orange flame, fidgeting at first and still, sleeping in the soft blanket of my curved hand, the heat kissing our chins. We breathe the anatomy of flame, hot plateaus inches from our noses, the enormity of silence settling on our shoulders. I take a deep breath and keep it, just a moment, holding in my lungs the unspoken weight of leaving. An accident. Suppose an egg breaks from the outside in, and the yolk bleeds enough sunshine for high noon. A chicken stares at an old farmer's hand and sits, while the farmer flicks light into the dry dirt, chuckling. This next poem is titled First Draft. And despite the title, it took me many drafts to finish it. So, First Draft, After Palace at 4 a.m. by Alberto Giacometti, 1932. I remember the night we drank away our words, built a palace out of them, lived before we slept as a beautiful architecture. A sheet of glass hangs suspended in its own kind of melancholy. I can see myself in it, alone, like the skeleton of a bird flapping its wings at nothing. Your pillared spine sinks in the woodwork. I recognize it. The first drafts of autumn fell into us, sprawled on the floor, footsteps of my old apartment walls settling. Outlined or not, there was a moment when we were an idea, a quiet floor plan, remembering each other before the moon chiseled you to sleep. We were just charcoal sketches of ourselves in those days, only a year ago and still rough. I think you fell in love with me only that night. When you got on the road back home, it was warm, and the paper-thin afternoon seemed the only thing worth loving anymore. This one's the last of the self-portraits. This is self-portrait as freezing. I love the silvery tail of a water droplet, I think. Icicles suspended from the gutter, the unadorned calls of blue jay. I have been told more than once that I lack in density, the tightness of solitude. I bolt the door behind my eyes. I pile up all the things that make me knowable, and they freeze into a spike of ice. It hangs off the gutter of my loneliness. A permafrost of fears. In the cold of myself, I am unspoken for. Tell me, this isn't who I am. Walking to the bathroom with a sore throat. The cough drops melted into their wrappings again. They looked lovely, forgotten in the sun-glazed windowsill. Not that they were ruined, but that, seeing them soften with a sunken readiness, they became more believable. This next one is titled, I Have Always Wanted to Be Opaque. I imagine your honeycomb lip balm lingering between the spaces of my words, my chipped sentences, my declarations of clarity, and I thought fragmentation of the self meant digestible, meant easy to handle, but staying with a sweet talker, I had to dissect your appetite for good marrow, your impatience with the discoloring of an unripened Polaroid. I chipped a plate trying to put it in the cupboard like an unfinished psalm. The distance between the palm and the forearm is the bridge you kissed the first night I made us chocolate cake. My wrist, I cannot stop rubbing the blemish of your lips, a malted tattoo. I wonder, when you pull out the poem I wrote to you and recite the final words, I too blur, if they come to fruition, if they chisel any shards away from this slate of longing. I only have a couple poems left, but I just wanted to thank everybody for coming before I finished. This next one is a little bit of a silly one, but it's a little bit close to my heart. So, realization after a drunken night out. I wake before the dandelions. Today's fog rolls in from the lake like a muffled cough, so as to not disturb the dragonflies. It is water the way memory takes shape in the mornings, dry throat from the fan oscillating all night, empty glass sitting on the bedside table. I forgot to let the dishes soak in the sink. The saucepan is stained with yesterday's spaghetti. I am yesterday's spaghetti. This last one is titled Sandbox Orchard. Tell me about the painting of the ocean that rolls on forever. The one with the pelican, perched on a rotting post, staring into the wild sky. I know you're usually not one for the hustle and bustle. Slow dancing with the curious moonlight is more your speed, dipped to a dusting of snow on the windowsill. The smell of coffee in the morning stitches the winter days together, the squirrels outside searching for a more comfortable tomorrow. Peel a bundle of apples over the sink. Toss the cores in the sandbox by the crumbling wall. Something will want them. Show me the beginnings of an orchard we don't want, how the seeds reveal our illusion. As the days go by, I find myself more and more in that painting, resting above that ocean, under those clouds, away from it all. Let's go back inside. The cold is in my bones now. Thank you.
Whenever I'm asked by poets if I understand poetry or if I write poetry, the answer is no, but I understand that was really good. Thank you. So I am here to introduce Angelica, and I'm really excited for everybody to get to hear her writing, since a lot of us have gotten to hear her writing. It's such a pleasure. So Angelica is the type of writer that I hoped I would meet while applying to graduate schools. One of my worries, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to, is like, is graduate school going to be worth it? Am I really going to learn something? And almost immediately upon meeting Angelica and reading some of the stuff she wrote, I went, okay, I'm gonna learn something, and I'm way out of my depth here. Angelica inspires me to be better, and I think everybody who reads her work will get that sense as well. I think she's smart, she's creative, she's multi-talented, and I've seen her knock every genre known to man out of the park. When I met Angelica, I'm like, okay, Angelica's a fiction writer, she's writing a novel. And I got to read a draft of the first, a draft of that first chapter in workshop. I'm like, okay, Angelica's a really good novel writer. And then I found some of her poetry, I'm like, okay, Angelica's a really good poet. Then Angelica's a really good nonfiction writer. And there's like that saying that, right, Jack of trades is a master of none, and that apparently does not apply to Angelica. I've seen her write about like crows in classrooms, about colonialism, about a salt house, and all of these things she does with such vivid imagery and such a knowledge of how to write a story and how to get people invested, that I am like taking notes on the side, both being like, I can't believe you wrote this is so good, tell me more, and then taking notes for myself about like what I can learn from Angelica and what she's doing that like I can incorporate into my own stuff, hopefully without plagiarism. She's been published in American Magazine, Crab Orchard Review, Chestnut Review, and Great Lakes Review. Last year, she was awarded the Sakalo Prize in Poetry. So like I said, Angelica's going to be reading the first chapter of her novel, and I'm really excited to see how it might have changed since workshop. And welcome up, Angelica, thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. That was so nice. Thanks for everybody for coming out tonight, especially my family who made the drive from far away. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for supporting me. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I haven't read for a while. So this is the first chapter of my novel, and it doesn't really have like a typical plot structure. It's more of an existentialist kind of novel. Yeah, and I think that really speaks to how I write poetry too, because I don't think that novels necessarily need to have a narrative, and I always think that they should include poetry. Okay, so I'll just start. My working title is There Is So Much. My husband Jonah and I were bundled up and sitting on the front porch of our falling down rental on Halloween. We had no holiday decorations up except for a small styrofoam pumpkin my sister gave me that blew away as soon as I set it out. Since our place could easily be mistaken for an abandoned house, we kept the porch light on so we wouldn't get skipped by the trick-or-treaters. It's always cold on Halloween in Ohio, but that day it was even chillier than usual. Few people were out, and I was realizing that we'd bought way too much candy when a beeping came from my coat. "What was that?" Jonah asked. He took a lifesaver out of the candy bowl, unwrapped it, and plopped it into his mouth, tucking it into the side of his cheek. With numb fingers, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "It's Eno. Looks like she sent me an article about Eugenia, as if I haven't already read them all." Eno and Eugenia were friends of mine from college. Eno and I had kept in touch since graduation, but I never talked to Eugenia anymore. When we were in school, I had the bad habit of frequently comparing myself to her, probably because we were the only two Latina art majors at Eastern, and our lives seemed to be taking parallel paths. We both ventured into the field at the same time, both married young, both produced work that focused on our experiences as Mexican-American women living in the Midwest, me with my abstract landscape paintings tattooed with Mesoamerican glyphs, She with her maximalist wall hangings woven from recycled textiles that exploded with texture and movement. We even looked alike with our straight black hair and heavy black combat boots. That Eugenia and I were so similar, at least on the surface, both threatened and affirmed me. On one hand, I wasn't the only one. I felt less alien when she was around, even when we weren't interacting directly. Whenever she was in my classes, the pressure eased slightly since I no longer felt like the sole representative of my people. I no longer felt the need to single-handedly disprove every negative stereotype about Latinas. On the other hand, I wasn't the only one. Eugenia forced me to consider if anything about me was unique at all, or if I was simply a walking cliche of a 20-something Chicana artist with my Palo Santo, antidepressants, Isabel Allende books, and Frida Kahlo sweaters. In recent years, our paths have diverged. She and her husband moved to New York while Jonah and I settled in Maumee, Ohio. She pivoted from the fiber arts to digital portraits, and her career took off. Solo exhibitions, residencies, a thriving online store where she sold mugs, t-shirts, and throw pillows with her artwork printed on them, while mine wobbled along. I didn't envy her success. I knew I could easily replicate it if I gave in to the aesthetics of Instagram and began mass producing my own work, but that's not what I was about. Any exciting news? Jonah asked as a mass of Among Us characters and inflatable spacesuits came around the corner. Each suit was monochromatic, red, blue, or yellow from top to bottom. It turned out that I hadn't already read the article Eno sent me. Holy crap, I said after finishing it. Eugenia ditched her husband and kid and moved to California. I don't know why I was so shocked. People got divorced all the time and it never meant anything to me. I even saw it coming usually. Sometimes I even celebrated it, like when my parents got divorced, because it meant they would no longer be screaming at each other from across the house. Didn't they just have a baby a few years back? Jonah raised his eyebrows. He was from the south of India, from a state called Kerala, and while divorce wasn't unheard of there, it was far less common. Yes, I replied. According to this interview, their daughter's going to live with him for most of the year. Listen to this. When asked why she began anew out west without her family, Eugenia said, I wanted to be bad, like a man. I scrunched my nose in judgment. Jonah picked up the old soup can we used as an ashtray and placed it inside an empty ceramic pot so it wouldn't blow away. It began to drizzle, the blurry street light glistening off the cracked and pitted sidewalks as the water collected in the grooves. She's right, isn't she? Jonah replied. Men leave their families all the time. And they're assholes too, I said. If a man does something shitty, that doesn't make it okay for a woman to do it too. Most serial killers are men, but that doesn't mean the goal of feminism should be to make more female serial killers to try to balance things out. The Among Us characters walked up then, tripping up the wet steps in their giant costumes. A person who I assumed was their mother called from the sidewalk. Make sure you only take one. That's okay, Jonah said, holding out the bowl of candy. The faster it's gone, the faster we can go inside. It's freezing out here. The kids happily scooped up handfuls of Starburst and dropped them into their orange plastic bags. Thank you, they called as they ran down the steps and over to the next house. At the sound of the children, our puppy Rocky began to whine from inside. I peeked in through the window to make sure he wasn't getting into any trouble. He tilted his head slightly when he saw me. His floppy brown ears made him look like an origami dog. I opened the front door and our other pooch, Scooby, lumbered out from our bedroom. He was an orange potato. With his droopy eyes, he stared at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his home. He yawned once, turned around, and went back to bed. Once I was cozy on the couch under a blanket and my fingers had sufficiently thawed, I headed over to Eugenia's Instagram and began to search. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe some clue about why she left, because there had to be a reason. What are you doing now? Jonah asked. He sat next to me on the couch. You've been glued to your phone. He ran a finger down my phone screen and Eugenia's feed quickly rolled by. Hey, knock it off. I'm trying to see something. I squirmed as I read the essay-like captions on her recent posts. My back was aching, that particular spot right between my shoulder blades. I stood up, bent over, and touched my toes. My back cracked, and I stood like that for a while, with my big head hanging over my knees instead of pressing down on my vertebrae like it always was. I kept scrolling as I remained there, folded in half. Jonah turned on a Malayalam movie and fast-forwarded through a musical number. Your back probably wouldn't hurt so much if you would get off your phone, Jonah said from up on his high horse. I know. I went quiet as I looked at a picture of Eugenia standing in a desert. Her arms were in the air, her face was sunburned. She looked happy. I read the caption. That explains it, I said to Jonah afterward. She has postpartum depression, that's why she left. Uh-oh, Jonah said. He paused the TV and looked at me. What? Don't you take medication for depression? Yes, but what does that have to do with anything? We're not having kids. No kids, no postpartum, no problem. I gave him a thumbs up and a smile. Even though we had agreed early on that we didn't want kids, Jonah occasionally dropped hints that pointed to the contrary. I sometimes flip-flop too, but the barriers just seemed too many. It wasn't just global warming, political unrest, capitalism, racism, and all the other isms. It was also me. I knew that if I had a kid, I would be one of those overbearing parents who never lets their child out of the house unless they're on a literal leash. I would always be worried something was going to happen to them. To give some context, I once called my older sister, and when she didn't immediately pick up the phone, I assumed that she died and wept for an hour until she finally called me back. It was hard to say if my nervousness was a personality trait or a symptom. Could a symptom be a personality trait? If it persisted long enough, maybe. I had fibromyalgia, an illness that manifested in joint pain, exhaustion, anxiety, and the occasional depressive episode. I always felt off, as if the shape of my soul wasn't entirely calibrated with the shape of my body. I was positioned slightly left of myself. I walked over to the coat rack and began to rifle through Jonah's pockets. Looking for these, he asked. I turned around and he held up the pack of cigarettes, lime green American spirits that were still partially wrapped in clear plastic. We put on our jackets, boots, and scarves and went onto the porch once again, this time taking Rocky with us on his retractable leash so he could pee before bed. Jonah cupped his hand around the cigarette, struggling to light it as the wind kept blowing out the lighter's flame. See, it's a sign from the universe that we shouldn't smoke, I said. But as soon as Jonah lit the cigarette and took his first drag, I held my hand out for my turn. How many are left in the pack? I asked as he handed me the cigarette. I took a puff and watched the smoke drift against the black night. Just 5. Jonah said that this was going to be his last pack of cigarettes. Our last pack. I wondered if I was addicted to nicotine. Maybe a little, but certainly not as much as Jonah. If anything, I was addicted to weed, but then again, addicted is a poor choice of words. It was medicine since I had chronic pain, but then again, isn't that what addicts always say? Nevertheless, we needed to stop smoking cigarettes as soon as we could. Not only did we know it was bad for us based on all the warning signs and truth adverts, but because Jonah's father had recently passed away after a decade-long struggle with esophageal cancer. This in and of itself became a reason to quit smoking, as well as a reason to continue. I never got the chance to meet my father-in-law in person, only on WhatsApp video chats, but that thin trail of smoke wafted upward and connected me to him, to everyone I'd ever loved who'd passed away. Jonah fell asleep on the couch, and I crept over to the dining room to examine some sketches. I preferred to create in the middle of the night, becoming more creature than human. The wooden table was cluttered with canvases, pens and pencils, and plastic plates I used as palettes. I smoked a joint as I flipped through my sketchbook, wondering what the hell I was doing. I'd been uninspired ever since I quit teaching at Golden Doodle, a children's art studio in the next town over. I had only worked there for a few months to pay the bills while I completed some larger pieces to submit to exhibitions, but my time there seemed longer. It stood out that way in my memory anyway. I always showed up an hour before classes so that I could plan my lessons and create art samples. One Saturday, I opened with Kirsten and Katie. Kirsten was the manager of the studio and Katie was the assistant manager. They both had dyed hair, Kirsten's purple and Katie's electric blue, and this, along with their coffee addictions, were their key personality traits. The studio was in a storefront with a large glass window which provided lots of natural light. The bottom of the wall-to-wall window was lined with children's artwork, air-dried clay sculptures, paper bag puppets, jewelry made of foil and pipe cleaners. There was a little waiting area where some parents sat while their kids were in class. This area was divided from the rest of the studio by the front desk. The left half of the studio was for toddlers and preschoolers, and as such, the tables and chairs were smaller than those of the right half of the studio, which was for elementary and middle school students. While Kirsten and Katie sat on the right side of the studio and chatted about Katie's love life, I quietly sat at a preschool table and went through a bucket of markers, throwing away the ones that were dried up. All three of us wore boxy white t-shirts that had the studio's name and mascot, a cartoon golden doodle puppy on the front. After a while, the phone on the front desk rang and Kirsten rose from her seat, walked over and answered it. Golden Doodle, this is Kirsten speaking. How may I help you? She said. She squinted and covered one of her ears. Sorry, can you repeat that? How do you spell it? Sorry? When she was done with the call, she hung up the phone, turned to Katie and said, that person was a little hard to understand. Let me guess, Katie said. They were Indian. She and Kirsten laughed. I think that maybe they forgot there was a minority in the house. I was glad I wasn't sitting at the same table as them as heat crept up my neck and my blood pressure rose. The hair on my arms stood up like I was Spider-Man, getting his tingles that tell him when a villain is about to come steal his girl. This was an interesting moment because there were several ways in which I could have reacted, and all of them were the right choice, and all of them were the wrong choice. If I said nothing, then I became complicit in her racism. But if I called her out, I knew she would start crying and playing the victim, and then the dynamic between me and the rest of my coworkers, all of whom were also white, would be weird. Being a woman of color in the United States, I was no stranger to casually racist remarks disguised as jokes. As pissed as I was at Katie, I also knew she didn't mean to be racist. It was simply a result of her upbringing. It was a result of a lack of culture, education, and basic self-awareness. That I felt bad for her was a good sign because it meant I was still human, but it was also annoying as hell. I knew that I didn't search and dig for the humanity in racist people because I was hopeful or woke or spiritually advanced, but because the only alternative would be to accept that I live alongside millions of people who aren't just innocently ignorant. Their entire identities are predicated on these hierarchies, seeing themselves as perfect, correct, all-knowing, and seeing us as subhuman, seeing me as subhuman. And when their fragile egos are threatened, as they inevitably will be because they are built on a foundation of bullshit imperialist lies, they act as though they're the ones being attacked. They mock us, kill us, cage us, rape us, and then say, you should be thankful. Depleted, I rose from my chair and left the studio through the back door. Summer was ending. Joggers from the gym next door ran by red-faced and dripping in sweat. I stood next to the dumpster in the corner of the parking lot and laughed until the tears. Okay, so that was the first chapter of my book, and now I'm going to read a few poems. Okay, so this piece is called Grounding Exercise with Saluditos. Feels like pavement scraping my knees. Tastes like the salt of Napantla spirituality. Smells like festival food, fried and sugared. Sounds like people screaming on a roller coaster. Looks like a day I already lived. Looks like we'll never get over Selena's death. Sounds like the clink of a candy machine in San Antonio. Smells like gunpowder and apricot. Tastes like a plastic fruit memory. Feels like a velvet tongue. Feels like the prunes in their wax bloom may never rot. This piece is called Being a Macho. In Spanish, isms are ismos and violence is violencia. Not Valentina, bottle of hot sauce kept in a politician's purse, the name of a daughter I am determined not to have. Cuidado, Mexicanas can get pregnant just by thinking about a heartbeat that isn't ours. Maria, Ama, my middle name in 2 tongues. No, I cannot make tortillas or whisper sexy somethings in Spanish. Only curses, a mouth full of black dripping wax. Like everyone else, I live in extremes. Madonna whore, I conceived myself, and I am a perfectionist, so you know it was immaculate. Okay, this poem is called Blood Bank, and it was inspired by Bon Iver, who's one of my favorite musicians of all time. Yeah, I started listening to him when I was like 16 or something, and it's like, you know, music that you grew up with really like informs your artistic process a lot, I feel. Okay, so Blood Bank. Molasses, plasma, river running cone. The sky is bare and you, listening to my out of tune, you fall asleep, I fall asleep, and there go our days, handed down from the heavens. Unfold me carefully, a claustrophobic bent sprints up the scales. My name is here, you are here, I see us shiver and crawl on the cold bathroom floor, whistling maroon at the moonstone smile. Starving wolves, I could have been you. I have been you, running home to the pained white flesh between my teeth. Flesh eating honeysuckle grows over the sore spots. We laugh wiry, tease feathers, haunt out. It hurts, craving what I should not crave. I set a stone on your chest, not a rope for a choir of pink seraphim. Suspend them over a brightly lit stage, as a man dances at the bus stop, and being known, showing you myself, is the most shameful thing I've ever done. And yet I cannot stop, strumming a sullen morning to stomach the inertia of bodies moving on their own. Veneer peeled back in the chapel, freestone peach eaten from hand, juices running home. It's too easy to forget myself as separate from you. Nails shining up the street, mushroom full. I let the lights fall, my wrinkled dress catching on a pretty thistle. Why, I still want to know you. I still want and want and want. Okay. This is my last piece for the night. And I didn't intend for this to happen, but it has a very similar title to the first chapter of my book. So the book is called There Is So Much, and then this poem is called There Is Much Work to Be Done. So I think it's interesting. Okay. There is much work to be done, so I take a nap. A sweat nap, a medicine nap, an apocalyptic nap stands on a balcony of a brick skyscraper. Something falls from the clouds, and right after I say, "What is that?" the bomb blast throws me back in my dreams. The world is always ending, the sky is always bursting open. It blossoms like a moonflower, dip-dyed in centuries of bloodshed. And I'm always rendered speechless by the fire. What does it mean that I grow older, but my dreams never change? I cover myself with a striped comforter. My little dear has chewed holes into the fabric. I begin to sew them shut with scrap embroidery thread, but doze off before the blanket is crawling with the satin-stitched caterpillars, teal and blood orange, that I had envisioned. This is my laziness, my chronic fatigue, symptom that cannot be stifled, seeping beneath the comforter. My favorite tree breathes in reverse. Clouds marvel at the shorn Ohio land, how the emptiness makes space for these thoughts and dreams. What I mean is, I'm always sleepy, can barely stay awake long enough to finish this. Thank you.
Another round of applause for both of our readers. Have a great night, folks.